but also during expiration, though in the latter case, much more weakly. Thus, Frank tells us that it is during expiration that we analyze the perfumes of wines. Besides the expiratory movements that we execute, sometimes quickly and intermittently, sometimes slowly, in order to place fresh portions of air in contact with the mucous membrane, the cavities formed by the folds of the mucous membrane are of great aid in the perception of odors, as the air laden with odorous particles accumulates in them, and thus prolongs the impression. The mucous membrane may be more or less sensitive according to its relative state of dryness or humidity, which, as I have shown, are much affected by colds in the head. When too dry the cellules are almost indurated, and when too moist they are separated from the air by a watery layer which prevents their regular action. As may be supposed from the foregoing, the sense of smell will receive two impressions, or rather, will receive impressions at two different times, the first before the wine is tasted, and the second when the tongue and palate have almost finished their action, that is, when the taster commences to swallow the wine. The sensations received the second time are various and very different from those received at first. The first sensations are those caused by the readily volatile substances that the wine contains, and which are given off at the ordinary temperature of the wine, and without other assistance than the shaking and motion given to it by the hand of the taster. The second series, which is perceived during or after swallowing the wine, is caused by the substances which are volatilized by the increased temperature due to the heat of the mouth and to the wine being well. Wine and the art of wine tasting. 23. Subdivided by the tongue, and finally to the action of the juices secreted by the various parts of the mouth. The taster, having thoroughly examined the appearance of the wine, lifts the glass to a convenient distance and inhales the odors which are given off, and which fill the upper part of the glass, sometimes shaking or striking the glass to aid their giving off. A wine may give off various odors, good or bad. I will treat of both of these when I come to describe the qualities good and bad which a wine may present. Before proceeding further with the tasting, it will be interesting to repeat the observations of Guyot, and of Brillat-Savarin, the modern epicure regarding the colors and aromas of wines. The aroma, like the color, writes Guyot, is a favorable or an unfavorable, an agreeable or a disagreeable sign, but wine is above all an alimentary beverage. It is well that sight and smell should be satisfied, but it would be puerile and ridiculous to give undue importance to the satisfaction of these two senses, and to found the pretensions of a wine to superiority exclusively on its pleasing effect on one or both of them. I make this remark expressly because there are many hosts who have a troublesome habit of insisting that their guests shall continually inhale the odors given off by their wine, and especially insist on their smelling their empty glasses during a great part of the dinner, at the risk of making them die of thirst. The connoisseur, like the taster, knows perfectly well the importance of the color and bouquet of a wine, but he knows also that their appreciation should be immediately followed by the introduction of the liquid into the anterior portion of the mouth. The color and the bouquet are two introductory notes of a gastronomic theme. Alone they have but a relative value, and give but a Partial impression of the whole theme. Prahlad Savarin, who is an authority in matters of taste, writes, in his Physiologic Dugout. For my part, I am not only persuaded that without the sense of smell there is no complete tasting, but I am tempted to believe that taste and smell constitute but one sense, of which the mouth is the laboratory and the nose the chimney, or to speak more literally, of which the former serves to taste the tangible parts and the latter the gaseous. Thus, for example, when we eat a peach, the first thing that strikes us is its perfume. When we place it in the mouth, we experience a sensation of coolness and acidity which invites us to continue, but it is only when the mouthful is swallowed, when it passes beneath the nasal cavities, that we perceive the perfume, and the peach completes the impression that it should produce. This will explain why the sensations which are usually accredited to the sense of taste are in reality much more complicated than is supposed, and that touch and smell contribute in great part to the complex effect. It may be said that without smell, taste would be reduced to very little and its agreeable sensations much enfeebled. Taste and smell combine with and complete each other, and Thomson has very justly defined them as the instruments of a unique asterisk here. Guyot might safely add that these people who are so troublesomely importunate are generally those who have recourse to the addition of artificial aromas to their wines. 24. Wine and the art of wine tasting. Sense. It is a well-known fact that if the nose be held whilst tasting a substance, we perceive the fundamental tastes, such as sweetness, bitterness, salt, and acid. But all the delicate flavors disappear completely. We have now arrived at the sense of taste, or, as some call it, the tasting proper. The sense of taste, with its somewhat complicated apparatus, is the one which has the most important office to fulfill. By it we decide whether the wine has the freshness, solidity, strength, delicacy, etc., in short, the qualities required by the most critical taster. The principal seat of the sense of taste is the tongue, although it seems to have been proved that both the anterior face of the membrane of the palate and the posterior part of the palate are capable of receiving gustatory impressions. According to the illustrious Professor Lussener, the tip of the tongue is distinguished by its ability to detect the finest gradations of flavor, whilst the posterior part, on the other hand, is distinguished by the intensity of its sensations, and is therefore more impressed by repugnant flavors. Different parts of the organs of taste receive different impressions from the same sapid substance. The action of sapid substances in contact with the tasting apparatus is somewhat complex, and is physico-chemical rather than mechanical, as formerly supposed. For this reason the particular gustatory sensation due to any aliment substance is felt more keenly when the substance is kept for some time in contact with the tasting membranes, as is the case, for instance, in slow mastication. This time, however, should not be too much prolonged in tasting wine, or it becomes impossible to distinguish between the many and diverse flavors which a wine presents. The taster, having now critically examined the wine to the best of his ability, by means of the eye and the exterior part of the organ of smell, must pass quickly to the domain of the sense of taste. To this end, he slightly lowers his head, carries the glass to his lips, and introduces a sip of the wine into the anterior part of his mouth, where the sense of taste receives its first impressions. The taster retains the wine in this part of the mouth for a certain time, and in order better to perceive the various flavors that affect this part of the tasting apparatus, he divides and subdivides the wine with the tip of his tongue, or as experts express it, he breaks up the wine in order to increase the surface of contact between the wine and the gums, palate, and tip of the tongue. As soon as the taster has received a distinct impression of all the sensations caused by the wine in this part of the mouth, that is, of those due to sugar, acid, tannin, etc., he slowly raises his head, thus allowing the wine to pass to the posterior part of the mouth. When he takes a short breath and slightly gargles, at this stage of the operation, he will perceive any earthy, bitter, or mawkish taste, or any taste of wood, cork, etc., that the wine may have. Here he will also remark the alcoholic strength or weakness of the wine. The wine is then, so to speak, left to itself and passes into the larynx, the esophagus, and on into the stomach. As the wine passes down the throat, it gives off odors which, as has been mentioned, ascend to the palate and the internal nasal ducts. The wine and the art op WJNE tasting. 25. Effect of these odors, and therefore of the qualities *ND defects of the wine, is intensified if the moment the wine is swallowed the mouth is moved as though masticating something. It has been attempted to measure the duration of certain sensations. I6, those due to the aromas, bouquets, flavors, alcoholic strength, and the various tastes of wine. In general, these sensations are perceived in the brief space of time of 3 seconds, and their duration varies from 10 to 20 seconds. After the wine has been swallowed, all the sensations disappear in about 7 or 8 seconds. In certain special cases, the aromas leave a more lasting impression. Bad tastes persist longer than good ones. In some wines, the aroma can be perceived for 55 or 60 seconds. The sensation due to astringency is of short duration in fine wines, and is much less intense than in the case of wines made from immature grapes, where it makes a violent impression on the lips and the sides of the mouth, which lasts sometimes for 100 to 110 seconds. Different bad tastes have different ways of showing themselves. Some are noticeable the moment the wine enters the mouth, while others are not perceived till some seconds after the wine is swallowed. Some moldy tastes do not manifest themselves for 7 or 8 seconds after the wine has left the mouth, but persist for 100 or 140 seconds. The gout de Rosny is perceived in from 10 to 15 seconds, and lasts for 50 or 60 seconds. The bitterness of some wines makes itself felt in 4 or 5 seconds, and persists for as much as 280 seconds. In tasting, it should be kept in mind that certain qualities are liable to variations, according to the condition and age of the wine. The delicacy of a wine, for example, is almost totally hidden when the wine is young, the more so the younger the wine. This is due to certain substances which are proper to new wines, but which, later, are deposited and disappear from the composition of the wine. Aromas are more or less intense, according to their origin and to the very variable circumstances under which they are formed. The sense of taste is the final judge, and from its sentence there is no appeal. But how much careful consideration should be used before this judgment is pronounced, what a multitude of sensations must be considered, on all of which this judgment must be based. The tongue, the cheeks, the gums, the anterior and posterior palates, the larynx, the nasal cavities, and to a certain extent the stomach, all contribute their separate sensations, which must all be taken into account. Besides these, the taster has also the sensations received by the eye and the nose. With all this varied testimony to consider, he should reflect deeply before delivering his verdict. For this reason, the taster, during the tasting and the few moments following, truly solemn moments, should be completely undisturbed by noise or otherwise. A taster can sometimes conveniently express his verdict of quality by means of numbers, usually those from 1 to 10 are used, and correspond to the following expressions: 10 perfect, 9 almost perfect, 8 quite good, 7 relatively good, 6 fair, sound, but not harmonious. From 5 to indicate various defects, according to their gravity. 26 Wine and the art of wine tasting. Qualities and defects of wines. The art of wine tasting, like every art or science, has a language of its own, without which the taster could not properly express his criticisms, nor compare his opinions with those of other tasters regarding the same wine. This renders it necessary to define or explain the various terms that have been adopted by tasters to express the sensations experienced by their senses of sight, smell, and taste, during the examination of a wine. Foam, spuma, mousse, father. When a wine is poured from one vessel to another, or agitated in any way, there forms a more or less abundant foam, that is, at the surface of the wine there are formed in greater or less quantities collections of little gaseous bubbles. Fine foam, spuma digr anna. Fine, mousse pearls fines, father. The foam due to the formation of very small bubbles. Coarse foam, spuma di grana grossa, mousse. Grosses pearls. Farther. When the bubbles are larger. Evanescent foam, spuma evanescent, mousse evanescent. Farther. Said of that which disappears immediately, or almost as soon as formed. As the old saying has it. Vino di brucia la spuma. A wine that consumes its foam. Persistent foam, spuma persistent, mousse persistent, farther. When the foam lasts some time and disappears slowly. Persistent foam, as a rule, is characteristic of a wine poor in alcohol, of a wine at a low temperature, or of a wine in need of racking, or, it may be, of a wine which is undergoing a slow fermentation, which may be either the normal and necessary alcoholic fermentation, or may be what is known as a secondary fermentation, in which case the wine is a prey to some malady. Tartaric fermentation, for example. The foam may also be persistent on account of effervescence, that is, the continued giving off of carbonic acid, which is dissolved in the wine, and which in escaping on the decrease of pressure forms little bubbles, which renew the foam. In the first cases cited above, the foam is usually limited to a more or less imperfect crown or ring of bubbles which form around the edge of the glass, or if the wine contains more than the usual amount of bonic acid. A bubble of gas will now and then be formed and rise to the surface. When some disease is the cause of the persistent foam, especially if it be that known as subollamento, zircone, or vino girato, vin tourneuf. The French, the circle formed is called unguia, nail, from which the expression il vino fa vungia nel bicchiere. This disease of turned wine is due to the filiform ferment, which destroys the tartar of the wine. Trans. In the last case, when the persistent foam is due to effervescence, which may be of various intensities, several distinctions are made, of which the following are the principal: wine and the art of wine tasting. 27. Sharp, pungent, frizzanti, piquant, wine vjig has the pinzo, it. Mordant, piquant, farther. In this case there is a somewhat abundant giving off of bubbles of carbonic acid when the wine is agitated, and even after, which tend to cling to the sides of the glass. Someone has written of a wine of this kind that nel below basidimord, it kisses and bites, it makes itself felt as a smarting or pricking on the palate. Sorb. Force pill frizzanti. Pilli rasant e piu piquant. Ready. This pricking is caused by the presence of a larger amount of carbonic acid than is normal to the temperature and pressure. The Tuscan usage of govno imparts this character to a wine. When the violent fermentation is over, throw in 2 handfuls of dried grapes to each vat. This will make the wine clearer and more piquant. De Vanzati. However, Polixi rightly says, for us a wine govnato is always a defective wine. Foaming. Spumeggianti, it. Ecumant, farther. This is said of wines which contain so much gas that when they are agitated bubbles are given off copiously, enough to form a layer of foam over the whole surface of the liquid. In the words of Reddy Cheney, Vetri Zampilla, Salter, Spumeggia, e Brilla. Wines which are bottled young, before they are well defecated, or which contain sugar when bottled, easily become spumeggianti when kept in a cool place. Sparkling, spumant, mustn't, it. Muso, farther. This is said of wine.s which, after pouring into a glass, give off from every part an abundant supply of bubbles of carbonic acid, or foam, which collects at the surface and is continuously renewed for some time. The wine bubbles, and as is commonly said, pearls the surface. In sparkling wines, the carbonic acid is in solution at a relatively high pressure. In these wines, after the first violent ebullition of gas, there is what is known as the fontanella sparkling, which is due to a continuous development of very small bubbles of gas, which, starting from certain points at the sides or bottom of the glass, rise like little chains of beads to the surface, where they cause the phenomenon known as pearling. Of sparkling wines there are 3 grades, based upon the amount of foaming, or rather on the amount of carbonic acid which is given off, and on the length of time during which the foaming continues. These grades are creaming, gently sparkling, mezzo spumant, it. Cremant, farther. These are wines in which only a slight layer of foam forms, and which give off but a moderate amount of gas, that is, effervesce very slightly. The pressure exerted by these wines on the interior of the bottles is less than 3 atmospheres. Ordinary sparkling, or medium pressure, spumant, bella spuma, Muso ordinaries, father. In these wines there is sufficient gas to cause the foam to flow from the bottle the moment it is uncorked. The French have a fourth grade, which they call Tisane, and which includes second and third-rate wines, which are, however, fairly drinkable. 28 Wine and the art of wine tasting. Pressure in this case varies from 3 to 3½ atmospheres. Strongly effervescent, molto spumante, spuma forte, grand. Muso, father. In these the cork is forcibly ejected from the bottle when unwired, and the wine is sufficiently charged with gas to be expelled from the bottle by its own pressure. In these wines the pressure approaches or surpasses 4 atmospheres. The maximum pressure that bottles will stand, without great danger, is about 6 atmospheres. Either too low or too high a pressure is a serious defect in sparkling wines. If the pressure is too low they do not effervesce. If, on the other hand, the pressure is too great, as in the case of bottles which the French call recouleuse, there is a ruinous percentage of broken bottles, or if the bottles do not burst the cork is driven out, and most of the wine lost. The carbonic acid which is dissolved in these wines, is produced by the fermentation of added sugar, or of a portion of that which the must contained. As already stated, wines which have been fermented dry, and not with a view of making them sparkling, can be rendered so afterwards by being charged, at a high pressure and low temperature, with carbonic acid. On this is based the system of carbon, a system now much used both in Italy and abroad. Sparkling wines may be sweet, douse, father. When the sweetness is decided and due to a large addition of syrup, dry, very slightly sweet, doligny, doucetas, father. When the sweetness is slight or hardly noticeable, extra dry, secchi, aciuti, sees, father. Which the English taste calls for, when there is no trace of a taste of sweetness. In various red wines the foam may present different colors, as white, bianca, blanche, father. The case usually with old wines. There are, also, in some localities, young red wines of which the foam is white or whitish. Rosier, rosy, father. This is the case with lightly colored young wines, and is characteristic, it may be said, of mature wines. Red, ruby, rossa rubino, vermiglia, rouge, vermeil, father. The color of the foam of heavy-bodied, deeply colored young wines. Orange red, rossa granato, rouge grenat, father. This is a deep vinous red, resembling the color of pomegranates, and is often seen in cutting wines, or those blended with them. Bluish, turchinicchia, balwastra, bloiter, father. Seen in wines poor in acid, as in some cutting wines which possess only from 3 to 4% in acid. Bright, clear, viva, brilliant, smagliant, vive, brilliant, father. When the foam has a clear, crystalline appearance, this is generally seen in generous, young wines of full acidity. Dull, dead, poco viva, morta, mort, father. The opposite of the asterisk. As a rule, authors give higher figures for the pressure of the various kinds of champagne than one have indicated, but the fact is, that my figures, if not too low, are certainly not too high. Of this, I am assured by Professor Karpen, who, in his experiments with sparkling wines, had occasion to test the pressures of many wines from the best acrid it foreign and domestic houses. Wine and the art of wine tasting. 29. Foregoing indicates a diseased or decrepit wine, or one in need of racking. After the foam is disposed of, the taster remarks on the degree of limpidity which the wine presents. A wine is said to be clear. Limpido, limpide, farther. When it is transparent and without cloudiness, or what Columella calls vinum defecatum quam lim pidissimum. Bright, brilliant, brillant, diaphano lucido, smagliant, brillant. Lucide, luisant, farther. These terms are used to express a perfect and, as it were, crystalline transparency. This is the condition of wines that have been well clarified or filtered. It may be noted here that clarification, unlike nitration, slightly modifies the composition of wine, as is proved by the quantitative determination of Professor Karpen, relative to wines that had been treated with white of egg. Following are the results of these determinations. 30. Wine and the art of wine tasting. A wine from lowland grapes, in which tartaric fermentation has reached the stage of development when carbonic acid begins to be freely given off, is a good example of this condition. This defect may be simply transitory, as when a wine has lately received some treatment, or an addition of alcohol or tartaric acid, or directly after cutting or mixing wines, or when a wine has been much shaken or been exposed to too low a temperature. If the defect is permanent, it shows that the wine is diseased or ready to become so, or that the wine has been badly made. In the former cases the wine simply needs time to depose or an increase of temperature, when it will right itself. In the latter cases some special treatment is necessary, such as sulfuring, addition of tartaric acid, clarification, pasteurizing, etc. Opalescent, iridescent, cangiant, opalescent, iridescent, toyant, farther. When the light in passing through the wine is decomposed, that is, when in looking through the wine rays of different colors are seen. This iridescence is best seen at the surface of the liquid and near where it is in contact with the glass. It is due, not to reflection or refraction, but to the phenomenon of interference. A wine exhibiting this peculiarity is open to grave suspicion of soundness, if it is not already in an advanced stage of disease. As an example of a wine in this condition, may be cited one which is, in the first phases of the disease, known as subolimento. If a little of this wine is left exposed to the air, it first becomes turbid, and loses its red color, then a precipitate forms and leaves a yellowish, sour, somewhat bitter liquid on top. As the disease progresses, if the wine is slightly shaken, mucus clouds will be seen floating in it, at the surfaces of which the above-mentioned phenomenon of interference may be seen. In the time of Pliny, to describe the color of a wine they had only the four following epithets: album, fulvum, sanguineum, nigrum. In those days they were easily satisfied. Now we use the following terms to describe the colors of red and white wines: colorless, decolorized, incolor, scolorito, decolorato, incolor. Decolor, father. When the wine has almost the appearance of pure water. When the rays of light pass through it without suffering any or only imperceptible changes. Colorless wines are easily obtained from perfectly ripe white grapes. Picked and handled with great care, and crushed when quite fresh and quite cool, then by exercising the most scrupulous cleanliness during the vinification and keeping of the wine, and by fermenting the must after it has been well defecated. If a wine is made which is not pure, in this case we must be careful not to mix the limpid part of the wine with the deposit. And before raising the bottle up, the wine should be decanted, which in its result is an operation exactly similar to racking. This decantation should be made in the cellar, and demands some precautions. First, the neck of the bottle is carefully raised, but not too high. It is then uncorked, care being taken not to subject it to any brusque motion, either in raising it or in drawing the cork. The wine is then poured into another perfectly clean bottle, taking care to stop before the smallest part of the deposit has passed into the fresh bottle or decanter. The quantity of wine lost by this method is very small, and the wine that is saved can be drunk to the last drop. If, on the contrary, a wine which has only a very slight deposit is placed on the table without decanting, the second or third glass will commence to show a loss of brightness, and the wine will have lost its agreeableness. There are some very simple machines made, which work on the principle of the siphon, and which greatly facilitate the operation of decantation. Lapis of the French, a kind of tartaric fermentation which is fully described on a subsequent page. Trans. Wine and the art of wine tasting. 31. Perfectly colorless, it may be rendered so by the use of animal charcoal, properly prepared, that is to say, in such a way as to prevent its diminishing the acidity of the wine. If this precaution is not taken, the wine, on account of its diminished acidity, will quickly turn yellowish on account of the formation of ferric compounds, which, under these conditions, takes place with great readiness. Straw-colored, Paglierino, it. Couleur de pale. Father. Of the color of straw, but somewhat pale. Amber, yellow, Giallo, it. Jaune, father. Is said of wines which have a deeper straw color. Golden, golden yellow, Giallo Dorito, Dorito, it. Dor. Father. This epithet sufficiently explains itself. Igli il vero oro polabile wrote ready of the wine of Trebbiano. Greenish, verdognolo, verdicchio, it. Verdtra, father. When a wine has a slight greenish tint, resembling somewhat the green of grass. This color is characteristic of certain varieties of grapes, for example, the Vadia or Burgo. Regarding the wine of this variety, it is said that the Vadia of Tuscany is not so called on account of its green taste, but because of its greenish tint. Frederick the Great, of Prussia, had a great predilection for the wine of Vadia. This greenish color is also characteristic of the wines of Reno, and in general of wines made from somewhat acid grapes. Pinkish yellow, or pinkish straw color, Paglierino. Rossistro, Giallo. Rossistro, it. Failrastra, father. Sometimes a wine, in addition to this yellow color may be natural and proper to the wine, or it may be a color which it has acquired from several causes, among which are some that have very grievous effects on the wine, and may be considered properly as maladies. The wines most generally subject to this disease of becoming yellow are those poor in alcohol, tartar, tartaric acid, and tannin, and which on the other hand are rich in malic acid. I have already alluded to one of these causes above, namely, the presence of iron compounds. Some colorless wines, which are rather poor in acid, become, when placed in contact with the air, yellow or yellowish-brown, in consequence of the formation of complex compounds, ferric, humic, etc. The commonest causes of the yelquing of wines can be traced to the conditions under which the vintage has taken place. If, for instance, the season has been cold and rainy, and the grapes have been gathered after the vines have in great part been denuded of their foliage, if the bunches contain decayed, soft, insipid grapes poor in acid and sugar, a wine of poor keeping qualities is obtained, and one very likely to become yellow, unless art comes to the aid of nature. Robinet, who has made special investigations with regard to the causes of this deterioration of white wines, distinguishes between that due to a fermentation caused by a mycodum, and those due to chemical action, and among the latter he mentions some which give rise to the formation of malic ether, which reacts on the sugar. I should, however, remark here that after stating his belief in the formation of the malic ether, he declares that he has been unable to find the rational equation of the reaction, or definite proof of its existence, but bases his belief in the formation of the malic ether on the taste and pronounced odor of cider, which the wine acquires an odor which is characteristic of the above substance. Robinet also makes the important observation that during his researches he had noticed the disappearance of the glycerin from wines which were becoming yellow. This disappearance of the glycerin would lead one to believe that the reactions which take place are much more complicated than supposed by Robinet, especially in consideration of the fact that the glycerin is subject to transformations, like the other ingredients of wine. Instead of trying to cure or ameliorate this defect in wines, it should be prevented, which can be done by the addition of alcohol and acids. The secondary fermentation which causes this disease is due, still according to Rob, in it, to a particular mycodum, which can be seen distinctly with a magnifying power of 900 diameters. This mycodum is extremely small, and of a no-long shape. It is carat FFmm in length, and hapismiley mm in width. 32 Wine and the art of wine tasting. Its yellow or straw color will have a pinkish tint of more or less intensity. This may be considered as due to imperfect cleanliness of the vessels used in winemaking, or of the barrels in which the wine has been put. Rose-colored, SNELLER, rosato, rose, father. White wines made from red grapes frequently possess this color in greater or less degree. Especially is this the case when the grapes have not been picked and handled with great care, or when the grapes have become the least heated. A white wine may also acquire this color by contact with barrels or utensils which have been used for red wine and not been thoroughly cleansed afterwards. This color is sometimes produced artificially. In France they use extensively tinted defects, so called after the town in which it is manufactured. It is claimed that it is free from alum and sulfuric acid *, but wrongly. White wines which have commenced to spoil, or in which viscous fermentation has started, and which begin to become brownish, or even bluish, and at the same time turbid, what the French call vin alder. Perdrix are rendered saleable by the use of this teint d'euphisms, and are sold by the French under the name of vins roses. Jacques Esson, Perrier, states that this coloring fluid not only colors and clarifies the wine, but also arrests the progress of the disease, or prevents it if it is to be feared. This fluid is also used in France for coloring sparkling wines. Bluish-brown, brown-yellow, Bruno Belwastro, Giallo Bruno, id. Brunbleuter, father. This color, which the French call alder perdrix partridge eye, is a dull, dark yellow, proper to some old, southern wines, but due in the majority of cases in which it is found to some malady of the wine, f. This phenomenon is observed not only in old but also in young wines, both red and white. Very probably its origin lies in several causes, as the numerous explications given by different authors would lead us to believe. Nessler has studied the change of color as it takes place in white wines. He tells us that the substances that cause the coloration, more or less deep, of the wine are contained in the stems and the seeds. Thus, wines which have been fermented in contact with the solid part of the grapes blacken very easily when exposed to the air. The presence of bad grapes in the fermentation also tends to render a wine liable to this discoloration. This change of white wine depends directly on the action of the air. The vin, or teint d'euphisms, was first prepared by Manceau by boiling elderberries and cream of tartar together. It sometimes happens, writes Robinet, that a perfectly bright white wine which has never been racked or otherwise treated before, is racked from its lees and treated with tannin and some clarifying material, then instead of becoming bright and clear the operations to which it has been treated have had diametrically the opposite effect. The wine has not taken the clarification, as the cellarmen say, has a bluish tint, and is turbid. This change or malady of the blue color happens most generally in wines of low acid and alcoholic contents, and which are at the same time rich in nitrogenous substances. According to Robinet, this malady is due to a secondary fermentation, caused by a mycodum which is analogous to the Mycodum acroxium, and has a very ephemeral existence. To cure this disease in a wine it generally suffices to raise the alcoholic strength, or sometimes an addition of 6 or 8 grains of tannin per hectoliter is necessary. In the latter case the wine is allowed to settle for 24 hours after the addition of tannin, and then clarified with isinglass. The above mycodum is killed and precipitated by cold wine and the art of wine tasting. 33. The wine loses its limpidity, becomes cloudy, and a black precipitate is formed. Meanwhile the taste of the wine often changes. The black substance may be decolorized by sulfurous acid. The use of this substance arrests or retards the blackened of the wine. Wines made from grapes poor in tartaric, malic acid, etc., like those which have been gathered when wet with dew or rain, or those which have been injured by cryptogams, are liable, when exposed to the air, to become cloudy and dark in color. The presence of an excess of iron in the white wines of certain locali of the southern provinces is the reason why, when they are at all exposed to the air, their color changes to a blackish green. Not southern wines alone, but also those from northern provinces. when they do not contain a sufficient quantity of acid, and more sp. Sealy of tartaric acid, acquire this color. Chemists explain this phenomenon in different ways, though all admit that it is due to the presence of some of the compounds of iron. Nessler tells us that wines produced on soils rich in the salts of iron, and even wines which have been for any length of time in contact with iron, as happens when there is an iron rod between the heads of the cask, or when there are nails in the cask, etc., if they become exposed to the air, turn black, for then the protoxide or ferrous oxide contained in the wine changes in contact with the air to sesquia oxide or ferric oxide. A black compound is then formed. By the combination of the ferric oxide with the tannin, this black color is not obtained with the protoxide. Other chemists explain the phenomenon by supposing that there occur or are formed in the wine certain humic products analogous to those which are formed by the decomposition of vegetable substances. These substances are feebly acid, and have a considerable dissolving power on the iron. Thus there are formed in the wine certain of the lower compounds of iron, which, on exposure to the air, change to the higher compounds, and give the wine the black-ish tint before spoken of. The wine then becomes turbid, and the flavor undergoes certain peculiar changes. Formerly some sparkling wines were made of this color, but now it is no longer found but as a defect. Dirty. Sporco, ten, father. A diseased, badly made, or badly kept wine sometimes becomes turbid, and its natural color is masked by other colors, giving the impression of something soiled or dirty. Among red wines the following are the colors most generally recognized. They may be of more or less intensity. Very light red, claretto, chiarello, chiaretto, clarete. Father. These terms are used to describe a class of wines which contain the least color of any red wines. The cause of this poverty of color may be in the nature of the grape, the mode of preparation, or it may be that the wine has been diluted with water. These wines form the connecting link between white and red wines. Trincy, writing of these wines, says, the French claretto is a smooth, vinous, lightly colored wine, with little aroma, slow and long in maturing, and not pleasing when drunk alone. Blended, however, in proper proportion, it is extremely good. The claretto drunk by ready, however, must have been very different from this, or he would not have written Benedetto. Il claretto. Chase I spiller in a vinan. 34 Wine and the art of wine tasting. Ruby, Rubino, Rubis, father. Wines which have a fine, vinous red, which recalls the color of the ruby. This color is that found most commonly in table wines, for instance, the wine of Chianti. It is also Thetola of the wines of Bordeaux. Some writers speak of vermilion wines, but a wine is never really of that tint. Wines rich in acid and of bright, intense ruby, will appear for the moment to be vermilion immediately after being racked, on account of the presence of a slight cloudiness. Purple, purpurino, purpura, father. The case where the natural red of wine tends slightly to violet. This color is seen in Montepulciano when it has reached perfection. Garnet, red, granato, rosso cupo, rouge sombre, father. Said of Wines which have a more or less intense blood red, recalling the color of garnets and similar precious stones, and of some varieties of goose berries, etc. This garnet tint is seen in heavy-bodied dinner wines, such as Barbera, Gattinara, Bortgobner, and in wines made from grapes grown on clayey and ferruginous soils. These wines in aging are apt to acquire more or less of the orange tint. Black, Nero, Noi, Father. This color, the nigrum of the Romans, is really never found in wine. The darkest wines, made from the Tyne Touriers, are not quite black, nor is even the concentrated solution of Senna-cyanin obtained by the Carpon-Comboni process violet, bluish, violatio, turcinicchio, bluastro, blauter. Violace, Father. This color is seen in a more or less marked degree in blending and other wines poor in acid. This tint is due to the violet coloring matter, which is contained in certain dark wines of southern Italy. It is very unstable and precipitates with great readiness. It is also found in the wines from certain American coloring grapes, such as the Jacques, the Marion, and York's Madeira, when they have been made without addition of plaster or tartaric acid. Orange, yellowish red, rusty, aranciato, giallo aranciato, color. Matone, rossico, orange, piglio di oignon, Father. These are the colors or tints of old or decrepit wines. By decrepit wines should be understood wines which have passed their prime and have begun to lose their valuable qualities. These tints are seen sometimes in young wines, but less marked than in old, especially in those which, at first, have much of the bluish tint, and which deposit their color quickly. Old wines often lose all, or nearly all, of their color, and become what is called scolorato, decolorized or faded. Dark colored, colorato, color, Father. Said of wines that have relatively a great deal of color. Wines may be divided according to intensity of color into deep colored, medium colored, and light colored wines. Deep colored wines are harsh and indigestible. I will now pass in review the qualities and defects of which the senses of taste and smell take cognizance. Aroma, arome, Father. By aroma must not be understood simply those odors which are delicate and agreeable, as when speaking of bouquet, for example, the foxy odor or aroma of certain American wine and the art of wine tasting. 35. Grapes, varieties of the species Vitis labrusca, and of the wine made from them, is far from agreeable. The aroma is the odor which comes from the skins of aromatic grapes and varies in quantity and quality carried according to the variety of grape and the degree of its maturity. It passes into the wine in wine-making. The aroma therefore exists in the grapes as well as in the wine. Bouquet. Profumo, bouquet, Father. Every fine wine exhales an odor peculiar to itself, which is always delicate and pleasing. Exception may be made of artificial bouquets, which, if not absolutely disagreeable in themselves, are always too strong and intense in a wine. The bouquet is due to the volatilization at ordinary temperature of certain substances known as ethers, which are formed by the reactions of the acids and alcohols in the wine during its process of aging. Thus, the bouquet is not to be found ready formed in the grape, as is the case of the aroma. Sev, avocato, it. Sev, father, gara, ja. The sev is neither bouquet nor aroma, it is a certain savor, a certain fragrant quality of the wine due to a smooth and delicate blending of perfections, of aromas and bouquets, which is perceived when the wine is in the mouth and in the act of swallowing, affecting the olfactory organs through the internal nasal ducts. The bouquet and aroma affect the senses before the sev. After drinking the wine. Carpn, writing of Moscato de Sagesta, says, of the most delicate fragrance and exquisite flavor. It is a dainty, fruity wine, which fills the mouth with an harmonious ensemble of delicious flavors, which cannot be described, but can only be experienced. Sev, which is especially the property of fine wines, is due to the presence of certain substances which are formed in the grapes during the ancients held aromatic wines in high estimation. They added to the must, in fermentation, different varieties of apples, then cane, amomum, cassia, saffron, ginger, and other species of aromas, to communicate the odor that they desired. The aroma most highly appreciated was that obtained by the addition of myrrh. We read, in fact, in Pliny, Lautissima apud priscos vina erant mersod orcandita, ut ad peri. Plauti fabula, qua persa ascribitur, quam ineat calamos adijubit. Peppered wine, which was prepared by fermenting the must-witten apples and pepper, was very much appreciated in the time of Pliny. Even the bouquet of wines has not escaped imitation and adulteration. The manufacture of artificial bouquets or perfumes for wines has become a regular industry in France and Germany, where it is carried on a large scale. There is a large consumption of such articles as bouquet of pomade, or of Bourgogne, extract of Bordeaux, the Rancio des Vins Sève of Baum, of Medoc, of Saint Julien, of Champagne, of Sillery, etc. The substances most usually employed to add an artificial bouquet to dinner wines are Florentine iris, raspberries, cloves, vine flowers, mignonette, nutmegs, bitter almonds, etc. To these should be added certain chemical products which are prepared more especially in Germany. All these attempts to imitate nature have been out very partially successful. A wine may be perfumed artificially, but it is impossible to give it sev. This artificial perfume is always too pronounced, and is never as delicate as the natural bouquet of wine. These artificial bouquets impress the sense of smell, but not that of taste. If a perfumed wine, then, is tasted without being smelled, its natural sev can be distinguished. Artificial aromas are not lasting, and gradually disappear from the wine. Chemically, the difference between aroma and bouquet is, according to Mormin and Berthelot, the following. The former is due to certain hydrocarbons and to the products of their oxidation. Perhaps, also, as Ordonio states, to the ether of a high, fatty acid produced by intercellular alcoholic fermentation, and which, being fixed, remains in the pellicle. This has enabled the experimenter to obtain it from the pomace of Fol Blanche. The latter seems to be due to a mixture of aldehydes with one or more essential oils, and of numerous ethers, the product of the combination of fatty and other polyatomic acids with ethylic and other alcohols. There are, for instance, valerian, amylic, propyl, acetic, etc. 36 Wine and the art of wine tasting. the short time preceding their complete maturity. These substances are peculiar to certain varieties of grapes, and owe their existence also to careful cultivation, as well as to certain conditions of climate and soil. In analyzing wine, writes Fure*, I have observed that fine and delicate wines, those renowned for their flavor and general high quality, contain a certain glutinous, viscid substance, which exists only in almost inappreciable quantities in ordinary wines, and is quite absent from inferior ones. This principle, to which wine owes its sève, has been called by Fure enanthin f, or flower of wine, and is only found in grapes which are completely mature. Some vineyards, which usually produce grapes containing this substance, fail to do so in stormy seasons. The only vines containing it in such years are those produced on dry sandy or gravelly soils. The same variety of vines, which, when grown on an appropriate soil, gives a wine full of sève, will, when grown on a rich, heavy, or clayey one, produce a wine containing little or no sananthin. Thus it can be seen that the preeminence of high-class wines is not due to the caprice of the taster, but to actual differences of composition, and to the presence of principles not found in inferior wines. The ordinary wines of the three communes of the Gironde, where the 4 high-class Bordeaux wines are produced, are, in general, poor in sananthin. These 4 wines, however, contain a larger quantity of the substance, as may be seen by the following enanthin contained in vines of high class. Wine and the art of wine tasting. 37. Portion, with a series of sensations which are agreeable or disagreeable, according to the nature of the flavors and their degree of intensity. Neutral flavor, sapor neutro, savor neuter, father. A wine is said to be neutral when it has no marked aroma or taste. Wines of neutral taste are the best base for the making of imitative wines, as they acquire most easily the taste of the wines with which they are blended. Vapid, flat, insipid, insipido, plat, father. A wine is vapid when it is lacking in alcohol and vinosity, or when, without having any defect. With regard to tastes in general, writers are at variance. The greater or less number of tastes and the possibility of their classification have been discussed. The number of tastes may be considered as infinite, and therefore a classification almost impossible. Such classification, however, has been attempted. Haladistin Guiche's 12 tastes, which have been reduced by Linnaeus to 10, sweet, acrid, fatty, astringent, bitter, viscous, saltish, watery, and insipid. Vinchgor proposes another taste, metallic. Physiologists distinguish in the sense of taste 4 specific energies, that is, 4 elementary sensations, viz., sweet, bitter, acid, and salt. The first 2 affect only the nerves of taste. The acid taste, on the other hand, if too strong, may cause pain, for which reason Vinchgor believed that acid and salt tastes affect also the sense of feeling, as is seen in touching concentrated solutions of acids. Nothing is known with certainty as to the way in which different tastes are distinguished, and we must be content with supposing that each flavor, sweet, sour, bitter, salt, acts upon special nerves which serve to distinguish them. This is the more probable, BLE, as different parts of the tongue are unequally affected by different tastes. We are still more in the dark regarding the intimate nature of the tastes, the chemical composition of the substances which they characterize seeming to have no connection with them. The chemical composition of a substance has nothing to do with its sweet, bitter, or salt taste. With regard to the acid taste, however, it may be said that every substance which tastes acid is also an acid from the chemical point of view. The vineyardist in making a choice of varieties to plant should keep in view the flavor which they will give to his wine. If he is planting in a new locality, where it can not be known what kind of grape will there best develop its flavor, he should choose a variety which gives a wine not neutral taste. The French, who are masters of the art of imitating wines, have this maxim: there are more buyers than there are connoisseurs. Trusting to the truth of this saying, they have been able to establish that great commerce of wine which has become one of the principal sources of riches to France. The cities of Sète, Bordeaux, Marseilles, Lunel, Montpellier, and others of the south of France are centers of the production of large quantities of wines of imitation. Do you wish to make, for example, a hectoliter of fine Bordeaux? Take red wine of the south, Roussillon or Narbonne, __, 60 liters. White wine of good quality 25 liters. Old wine of Alicante 12 liters. Old wine of Malaga 3 liters. Conservador Nantico 25 grams. The Renan thick conservative is dissolved in about a liter of warm white wine. The whole is then well mixed and allowed to stand for 2 weeks. During this time a slow, insensate BLE fermentation goes on, which completely mixes or blends the ingredients. The wine is then drawn into sulfured casks, clarified, racked again, and the Bordeaux is made. This, however, is too expensive a Bordeaux. Here is a cheaper one. Red common Spanish wine 70 liters. Wine of Narbonne 125 liters. Wine of Malaga 5 liters. Bordeaux extract a quarter of a bottle. Enan thick conservative 30 grams. This is treated in the same way as the first. If a still cheaper Bordeaux is desired. Ordinary red wine 81 liters. Roussillon and Narbonne 15 liters. Old brandy 4 liters. Bordeaux extract a quarter of a bottle. Enan thick conservative 30 grams. The above information is for the edification of those who prefer a bottle of this Bordeaux to a bottle of Chianti, of Valpolicella, of Valtellina, and of many other Italian wines which are far superior to these French concoctions. 38 Wine and the art of wine tasting. Due to secondary fermentations, it lacks some of those qualities which together render a wine agreeable. An insipid wine may have plenty of color, however. Insipid wines are very subject to unfavorable changes. Sapid, sapido, sapide, father. A wine is described as sapid, it is meant that the acids are agreeable in quality and proportionate in quantity. Vinous, vinosity *, vinoso, vinosita, vino, vinosit, father. A wine is said to possess vinosity when it imparts in a certain degree that sensation of warmth characteristic of the alcoholic flavor. Weak, debole, vino che scappa in bocca, farable, penalcoholic, father. A wine is said to be weak when it is of low alcoholic strength, or when its alcoholic contents are not in proportion to its other constituents. Wines of this character have in general little flavor, are insipid, and difficult to keep, on account of the gummy or mucilaginous substances which they contain, and to which they owe what little flavor they have. Light, legro, sottile, leger, mince, father. A light wine is one which is of good quality, but at the same time contains a relatively small amount of color, body, and alcohol, no prominent flavors, and no sweetness. The general effect of a light wine is one of delicacy, though there exists a just equilibrium between the various constituents. Soft, mild, molle, mu, father. A mild wine is one which does not affect the palate by its harshness or astringency, as do rougher wines. Softness characterizes wines which are neither sweet nor dry, and not too alcoholic. Alcoholic, alcoholico, alcoholic, father. When a wine is spoken of as alcoholic, it is generally meant to be one containing a relatively high percent of alcohol, but of an unsatisfactory and unsatisfying quality. Generous, generoso, genero, father. A generous wine is one with plenty of alcohol, but of a smooth, warming, strengthening character. One of which a small glass produces a feeling of well-being and sensible tonic effects. Warm, hot, caldo, showed, father. A hot wine is one containing a good deal of alcohol, which produces a somewhat burning sensation in the mouth and stomach. Sharp, lively, vivo, vif, father. This is said of a wine which, without being pronouncedly acid or alcoholic, affects the palate vividly. It is a quality compatible with lightness, but not with smoothness. Fullness, roundness, stoffer, itoff, father. Expressive of a robust homogeneity, which gives the impression of solidity and good constitution. Body. Corpo, cor, father. A wine is heavy-bodied when it is rich in extractive matter and has high vinosity. Heady, fumosa, fumo, father. Wines which contain much carbonic acid, and thus go quickly to the head, produce effects that are usually confounded with those of drunkenness, but which, in reality, differ very much from them physiologically. Wines of this character are unwholesome. Many use this word in a somewhat different sense, they mean wine-like. That is, having a full supply of the quality or qualities which preeminently distinguish wine from other alcoholic beverages. Trans. Wine and the art of wine tasting. 39. Dense, pulpy, carnoso, pulputo, macerone, charnu, pulpo. Lured, father. Expressive of a wine that has what one might almost call a pasty consistency. Heavy, coarse, grave, graven, pesanti, capitoso lured, gross. Pesant, capito, father. Wines which have much body and little alcohol, and which, even when drunk in small quantities, go to the head and weigh on the stomach. Clean, franco, frank, father. Said of a wine which does not leave the slightest suspicion of any taste indicating unsoundness, or of any defect due to the bad condition of the grapes from which it was made, or to neglect or improper handling of the wine. Harmonious, harmonico, harmonique, father. Well constituted. This is said of a wine when its constituents are in exactly the proper proportions, well balanced and blended, forming a perfect whole, which is at the same time pleasing and satisfactory. Wine that ends well, vino che finis bene, it. Vin che finit bene. Father. This is an expression used by the taster to define an impression that remains for a certain time after drinking a fine wine. It means a wine in which the constituents are harmonious, and remain so even after the wine has passed from the mouth, impressing the senses with nothing but pleasing sensations to the end. These sensations continue even after the wine has been swallowed, insomuch that one might almost say that it wished to prolong the pleasure of the drinker by a fresh visit to the organs of taste. Wine that ends quickly, vino che finis presto, it. Vin che finit vite, Father. Wine that leaves but an ephemeral sensation in the mouth. That is to say, almost as soon as the wine is swallowed all trace of it is gone, and the palate, tongue, and stomach seek in vain to recall its character, flavor, bouquet. All have gone, all have disappeared. Wine that ends badly, vino che finis male, it. Vin che finit mal. Father. A wine that after swallowing leaves a disagreeable taste, bitter, woody, etc., in the mouth. Delicate, delicato, it. Delicate, Father. A wine to be delicate must be perfectly harmonious, soft, and agreeable. Fine, or high quality, fino, it. Fin, Father. A wine that unites a natural delicacy with an exceptionally agreeable flavor and delicious bouquet. Mute, muto, it. Mue, Father. Said of unfermented or only partially fermented wines, they are characterized by a sweetish or gummy taste. They are wines which have been made from musts treated with sulfur, anhydride, or fortified with alcohol. The wines that are generally made mute are white wines that are to be used to sweeten liquors or to increase the sugar contents of new wines, or that are to be used for the manufacture of syrups by concentration in vacuo. When a wine is made mute by the use of sulfurous anhydride, the risk is run, if too much is used, of giving the wine, first, a taste of sulfuric acid, and afterward more or less pronounced bad flavors due to the sulfates that are formed. These wines are kept in cool cellars, where the temperature is as nearly as possible constant, and in strong and well-hooped casks. They ought to be clarified, preferably with gelatine, in order to obtain a perfect clarification. About 8 or 10 grams of tannin are added to each 40 wine, and the art of wine tasting hectoliter before putting in the finings, 1/10 per m, or about 1.25 ounces per 100 gallons. Smooth, velutato, morbido, it. Velute, moello, Father. A smooth wine fills the mouth with its grateful flavors and fragrance, imparting its delightful series of sensations without the slightest harshness. This quality is due to the presence of a certain quantity of glycerin, and not to glucose, as at first one might be inclined to think. In this latter case the wine would be called amabile, fruity. It is glycerin rather than glucose which gives a wine that kind of smoothness which might almost be called unctuosity. In very high-class wines the smoothness or unctuosity is due not only to glycerin, but also to other bodies which have not yet been well studied. They occur more especially in wines of very favorable years. That is, of years when the season has been so propitious that the grapes have been able to attain an exceptionally perfect maturation. Many chemists have attempted to determine the nature of these substances. Tufure, who studied the wines of the Gironde, believes that this unctuosity is due to the same substance as Sève, a substance which is of similar character to pectine and mucilage, and which he called sanin. Thin. Batilliot claims to have found in the high-class wines of Bordeaux the peculiar substance which causes their unctuosity, and which he calls croatine. Mulder, on the other hand, from observations made on the wines of the Gironde, considers this unctuous substance as analogous to dextrin. Whatever may be the nature of this substance, it is useful to know that the wines in which it occurs, if not well kept, are liable to undergo an almost insensible fermentation, which destroys this substance, and so takes away from the wine that quality which is due to it. Pasteurizing or heating will also deprive a wine of this quality. Fruity, amabile, suave, farther, the Latin, suavis vel subdulcis. A wine which is very faintly sweet on account of retaining a small quantity of grape sugar or glucose. As is said sometimes, cul vinito così amabile vergaiu senzurica. Jersine. Technically, a fruity wine cannot be said to possess Sève because it tends towards sweetness. However, a wine which is very slightly sweet may possess a good Sève in the sense that it produces those sensations which are the quality of wines of the highest class. Sweetish, doligno, dulcero, farther. A wine is said to be sweetish when its sweetness is undecided, unsatisfactory, and not in harmony with the other components of the wine. It is due usually to a bad fermentation and incomplete defecation, or it may be, with an ordinary table wine rich in mucilaginous substances, that it is becoming sick or undergoing one of those insensible fermentations, that is, the tartaric fermentation, to which such wines are so subject in the spring. In the latter case there is a moment when the wine can be detected in becoming slightly sweetish, and if prompt measures are not taken it will in a short time be completely spoiled. This turning flat and sweetish is due to the mucilaginous substances which, under the action of dilute acids and a favorable temperature, become transformed into substances resembling dextrin and other saccharine matters, which give place, or rather, wine and the art of wine tasting. 41. Favor, when the alcoholic fermentation has not been of a thorough character, the development of secondary fermentations. Sweet, dolce, daus, farther. A sweet wine is one in which the sweetness is pleasant, because not excessive, and in harmony with the other principal ingredients, and more particularly with the alcoholic contents. Tu vino dolce. E glorioso. Rendi vuomo pingi e carnoso. E allago lo stomaco. Over sweet, dolciastro, dulcitra, farther. This is said of wines which are too sweet, or in which the sweetness does not seem to be well combined, that is, the sugar seems to have been lately dissolved in the wine. Honey sweet, sickly sweet, dolce smaccato, melicchino, daus. Fade, Milo, farther. Of white wines when they are very sweet and of a nauseating sweetness, resembling must more than wine. Melicchino is perhaps a corruption of Melicino, meaning cider vinum. Ex mollis, pomatium of the Latins. New or young wine, vino joven, nuovo, it. Vin jeune. Farther. A. Wine which has been made but a short time, and which has not undergone those changes and transformations in its composition through which it acquires new qualities, due to the new substances which are formed, and